Good morning.
Last week, when you spoke to Mr. Martinez, you were asked several questions about taking personal responsibility and how you blamed everyone else. Do you remember that line of questioning at various points last week?
Yes.
In that regard, let me ask you a couple questions. Were you forced to testify?
No.
When you chose to testify, did you do so with the idea that the lies you told would be called into question?
Yes.
And you chose to testify anyway?
Objection, relevance.
Approach.
Overruled. You may continue.
Now, Ms. Arias, getting back to my question, knowing that you knew that you were going to be questioned about the lies you told, or you assumed you'd be questioned about the lies you had told throughout this process when you chose to testify, right?
Yes.
And you chose to do it anyway. You chose to testify anyway, right?
Yes.
And in terms of admitting certain things against this claim that you didn't take any personal responsibility, I recall days ago, one of the first questions I asked you was whether or not you killed Travis Alexander on June 4th, 2008. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And do you recall your answer to that question?
Yes.
Yes. And your answer was that you did, in fact, kill Travis Alexander on June 4th, 2008. Do you recall that, telling us that?
Yes.
Objection. Leading also misstates what she said. She killed him, but, then she added the but portion.
Sustained.
You also told us why you were forced to do that, didn't you?
Yes.
And remind us, why was that?
Well, he was trying to kill me, so I was defending myself.
Did you go to Mr. Alexander's home on June 4th with the intent on killing him?
No, I didn't.
Did at any point in time during that day, June 4th, 2008, did you make a conscious decision that I want to kill Travis Alexander?
No, that was never a thought.
Okay. Ms. Arias, when you began talking to counsel for the state, you were shown a couple exhibits, and I want to cover those with you. Actually, let me first show you, if I can refresh your memory as to when these photographs occurred, showing you exhibits 452 and 453.
Yes.
And do you remember the date that the photograph took place?
May 15th, 2008?
I'm sorry, just say May 15th?
Yes, 15th.
Okay. showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 452. If I recall correctly, that's you and your sister Angela, right?
Yes.
All right. And that is your hand around her, right?
That's right.
Okay. And in Exhibit 453, got a second there. That's your hand again, right?
Yes.
Now, perhaps before we move on past this photograph, you would concede that there's no visible bend in your finger, at least in terms of any injury, correct?
Correct. Well, it's sort of bent.
Right. Well, going back to 452, it appears, I know Angela is wearing a hat, but it appears that she's at least a few inches shorter than you. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's her height.
Okay. How tall are you, Miss Arias?
I think I'm 5'5.5" or 5'6", somewhere around there.
I'm a little taller than that, so I'm going to ask Miss Wilmot to come forward. Jodi, if you could step down, please, in front of the jury.
Judge, for purposes of this, we need to have Ms. Wilmot's height and whatever it is that she's wearing. Other than that, I would object on the grounds of relevance.
The objections overruled.
And we'll just have Miss Wilmot, for the record, state her height.
I would say I'm 5'3", 5'4" with heels on. I can't be certain. I don't know how high my heels are.
If you could, Jodi and Miss Wilmot, could we see you, for lack of a better term, recreate the pose we see in Exhibit 452? And if you could turn. Okay, thank you. Now, prior to, well, we talked a lot about injuries you sustained to your hands. And when you have sustained those injuries, prior to June 4th, immediately prior, I should ask, did you suffer any injuries to either one of your hands?
Yes.
Could you tell us how those injuries occurred?
I believe it was my index finger, and I was putting away big margarita glasses at work.
Objection on affirmation date.
Sustained.
When were you putting away these margarita glasses?
I believe, if I remember correctly, it was June 1st. That's what the date stamp said on the photo.
Okay. And what happened to your hand and where were you working?
Casa Ramos.
Okay. And how did you injure yourself putting away margarita glasses at Casa Ramos?
I was just moving too fast and I was a little bit clumsy, not intentionally, but there's a metal shelf beneath the bar, and that's where they all sit and cool off, because when they come out of the dishwasher, they're really hot. So they have to cool off before we can put margaritas in them or they'll crack. So I was rotating the cool ones from the back out and putting the hot ones in the back. And as I was reaching in with my hand, I hit some of the metal and it peeled back some of the skin, and it was just a wound.
Did you photograph those injuries?
Yes,
And how did you do that?
just with my phone.
Okay. Would that be the heliophone we'd been discussing earlier?
Yes.
If I may approach, Your Honor. Ms. Arias, I want to show you what's been marked as exhibits 506 and 507, respectively. Could you take a look at both those exhibits and see if you recognize those as the photographs you took?
Yes. I guess the date would have been the 31st of May instead.
Okay. I'm going to move to admit exhibits 506 and 507.
Objection relevance, these show injuries to the right hand.
Will we approach?
May approach. Objection overruled. Exhibits 506 and 507 are admitted.
Now, Jodi, while those are being marked into evidence, could you describe for us why you chose to take these photographs?
Yes, after my boss gave me a big Band-Aid to cover it, because it kind of covered a larger surface area. And so I went home, took a shower, and then after that I peeled it back just to check on it, and it was just kind of gnarly, so it was like a trophy picture kind of. I was going to send it to some friends, say, look what I did at work. I mean, it sounds strange saying it post June 4th, but before that it didn't seem like a big deal. I sent it to a few friends to say, look what happened, this is crazy, kind of thing.
Okay. Showing you what's been marked as exhibit 506. That's one of the cuts you sustained to your hand?
Yeah, the fold of the skin is back over the injury.
Okay. And can you tell from this exhibit, is this your right or left hand?
That would be my right hand.
And exhibit 507, is that a photograph of a different injury or the same injury?
The same one, different angle.
Okay. And we're talking about your right index finger as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, Ms. Arias, you had told us that these injuries occurred on the 31st of May. Is that
It would have been the
accurate?
31st or the 1st. I'm not sure if the timestamp on that is also Greenwich time or if it's Pacific Standard Time.
Okay. But given that you were serving margaritas, would it be safe to assume you weren't working the breakfast shift?
That's correct.
Okay. So it would have either been the evening of the 31st or the evening of the 1st when these injuries occurred. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And these injuries we just saw in exhibits 506 and 507, had they healed by the time you went to Utah on June 5th or 6th?
I think it had healed mostly.
Do you recall if you still had bandages on your hand?
I don't actually recall. I know I eventually got bandages on my hand, but I don't remember if I still had one from the index finger or not, or if, I don't remember.
Okay. Now, before we get too far off the subject of hand injuries in Utah, you said that you weren't sure if you had bandages on those, these injuries on your right hand. Do you recall if you had any other injuries to your hand
In Utah?
in Utah?
I did. I had Band-Aids on my right hand, and I don't think it was the index finger. I think they were other fingers. I don't remember, but I know I had Band-Aids on my right hand.
Now, the Band-Aids on your right hand, you said it may not have been your index finger. Was were these injuries caused by the same incident at Casa Ramos, or were they caused by something else?
Something else.
Okay, and what was that?
It was broken glass. I dropped one of Travis's glasses when I was downstairs when I arrived the morning of June 4th. We were getting water from, he has a cold water dispenser on his fridge. So I was getting water and I dropped one, and I was cleaning up the glass because I thought, I clean up glass at work and it's not something I'm uncomfortable with, so I guess I was being too casual and careless, and I cut my fingers.
And you have stated to us that those injuries were on your right hand.
That's correct.
How are you so confident of that?
That's what I remember pretty clearly.
Okay. As it relates to your left hand, do you recall having injuries on your left hand when you were in Utah?
I don't recall one way or another. I definitely don't remember an injury. I'm not saying there wasn't, but I don't remember one.
Would it be fair to say that whatever injuries you had on your hand when you arrived in Utah weren't your primary focus?
That would be fair to say.
Now, we heard about some of the injuries to your hand. We heard about the struggle or fight you had with Mr. Alexander on June 4th. Did you have any other injuries visible when you went to Utah?
As far as visible, not that I'm aware of. I had other injuries, but I think they were covered with clothing.
Are you telling us then that you had to make effort to make sure these injuries were covered?
No, I think it was just like I had injuries on my feet and my ankles, and I think just because I was wearing socks and shoes, they weren't visible.
Okay. Now this injury again, maybe you could be so kind as to hold up and show us your broken finger again as you did on direct.
Oh,
Your finger?
regular
No, this
or-
way. This
oh.
way, so it's visible.
Like this?
Okay. When did that injury occur?
January 22nd, 2008.
Okay. Now you were asked, and that is the injury you incurred when you testified to having received when Mr. Alexander was kicking you in the ribs and he ended up kicking your hand, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You were asked about any medical attention that you might have sought for that. And you said something to the effect of you didn't seek any professional medical attention. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did you receive anything that could be considered quote-unquote medical attention? Did you bandage it? Could you just kind of explain that to us?
Yes, we didn't bandage it because there was no broken skin, but after Travis calmed down and apologized, he made a splint for it, and I just thought that was really nice because he got really angry and then was very ashamed.
Actually, beyond the scope of the question, what medical treatment?
Sustained.
How did you feel about Travis making this? You said Travis made this splint for you. How did you feel about him making that?
Objection beyond the scope. She was asked her feelings by the state.
Approach, please.
Continue.
And Ms. Arias, were telling us Mr. Alexander broke your finger, that you didn't receive any professional medical treatment for it, but that Mr. Alexander made a splint for you. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you feel about him making that for you?
It sounds kind of weird, but it was kind of endearing because he was very tender with it. He was being very careful, and he got a bag of ice and crushed it, and we put ice on it, and so he just did what he could to right what he had wronged, I guess you could say. So that meant a lot.
And you found that was enough for you to perceive it as endearing, is that right?
Yes, the moment was endearing. It seemed very tender. He was very sincere, and I mean, when I got home, I took it off and cried, and he made another one for me later, but at the moment when he made it, he was just very gentle with it.
Okay. During the time you spent answering Mr. Martinez's questions, you're talking about how great it was for him to make this splint for you. We also saw some journal entries and text messages and things that talked about in which you praised Travis. Do you remember seeing those throughout the
Yes.
course of the? Okay. I want to ask you about a few of those, Ms. Arias. We were talking about some of the things you had told us during cross-examination, some of the things you've been shown about how great a guy you thought Travis was. I want to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 484. Can you see that?
Yes.
You said, Travis, I thank you for being such an amazing friend. Was he an amazing friend to you?
Yes, at times he was very amazing.
You say at times. You know, we heard about the Cinnabon card that he left on your car when you came home from a trip.
Yes.
Were there, before maybe we go beyond that, what made him such an amazing friend to you?
It's more about how he made me feel. He would, and things he would say. He believed in me. He saw my potential or saw potential in me, and he just made me feel like I could go, I don't know, he made me feel really good, like I could realize that potential and beyond. And I feel like he saw past whatever exterior was there and saw inside, and he made me feel like I was a beautiful person inside.
Okay, you said a couple things there. You said he made you feel as if you could realize your potential. Is that something that anyone else, is that feeling something that anyone else had given you in your life?
Occasionally, Daryl, and occasionally Matt, and I don't really remember with Bobby, but I mean, I think there was a few art teachers that really believed in me. I don't know.
But was there something different, be it the frequency or the type of affirmation about your potential that Mr. Alexander was giving you that was different than the affirmations you might have been getting from other people in your history?
I would say it was different. It was a lot more intense, more frequent. It's kind of like I was swept off my feet. He came at me really strong, but in a positive way, and it wasn't like what I had experienced before. It was nothing like what I experienced before, but it was similar in that it was positive, but it was just like amplified. That would be a good description.
Okay. Said you tell him that you call him a rock, a light, and an inspiration. Was that, when you said that on April 18th, 2008, was that sincere, your sincere feeling?
Yes.
What did you mean by inspiration? How did he inspire you?
He was a motivational speaker, and he would give talks sometimes at prepaid legal events, and he wouldn't just inspire me, he would inspire the whole crowd, so it created a sort of synergy or an energy in the room that just makes you feel like you can walk out of the room and conquer the world. He had a gift for that.
And that inspiration you talk about him providing in motivational speaking at prepaid legal seminars, did he provide that to you on a personal basis?
Yes, he counseled me many times on a lot of subjects.
Okay. You talk about how you appreciate the ways he's gone out of the way for you. What do you mean by that?
Do you want examples, you mean?
Yeah, if you could give us an example.
Well, Well, when he got me to move to Arizona, he paid for the rental. So I put all of my things from I had from Big Sur, and then I went to Palm Desert to get more things. And he paid for the rental to get out there, and I paid him back, but he gave me the money for it. And then he offered to have me store all of my things, my extra things that I didn't have room for at the house I was renting. He offered to let me store them at his house. Like my paintings, he cleared a space in his office closet just for them so that they wouldn't be exposed to the elements. Everything else went in the garage. My house plants, I didn't have room for them where I was, so he made space on his kitchen counter to keep them there, and they stayed there for the whole time I lived in Mesa. Other times when we were maybe at a prepaid legal event locally, he would pick up the tab if it was just dinner or something. Just little nice gestures that he would do. There was the Cinnabon thing that he went out of his way just to go get that just for me because he knew I wouldn't be able to get it when I flew back into Sky Harbor. I mean, there were tons of little things like that that he would do constantly.
Okay. Now, drawing your attention back to April 18th and that time period of 2008, one of the things you were asked about by Mr. Martinez is your feelings towards Mr. Alexander. So, in that regard, drawing your attention to this time period, did you love Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Now, when you were asked about that last week, you kind of were saying that you loved him, but it was different than it had been in the past. And you weren't allowed to explain that. So if you could kind of explain that difference, how you felt about him previously as to how you felt about him, say, using April 18th, 2008 as a guidepost.
Objection to the characterization, not allowed to explain it.
Sustained. Rephrase your question.
You explained to us the difference between how you felt about Mr. Alexander when you were dating him and you were involved in a relationship as opposed to April 18th, 2008?
Yes. When we first, I felt like I began to love him early on, but not in love. Like, I love all people. So he got that advancement automatically. But then as I got to know him, my love for him grew. And I wasn't sure we were going because for about 5 months after meeting, we sort of just meandered without being in any kind of official relationship. But soon I began to fall in love with him. And that was during the time we were dating. And I felt pretty intense as far as being in love with him. And so when I discovered the things he was doing outside of our relationship, obviously that hurt and we broke up. But I still loved him. The love didn't go away just because the trust did. So we were sort of making an effort to maybe get back together, not testing the water. And then I kind of realized that maybe he wasn't going to change. And then when the morning of Havasu Pai, when he swore at me, I just thought, I didn't want to continue with somebody like that could speak to, I didn't want to have children with somebody that could speak to their mother that way. I kind of looked at it that way. So I still loved him, but I began to pull back from the idea of a future with him. And so we remained in a limbo state for a while, and then it became apparent around Christmas time of 2007 is when I flew back home and realized I want to be here. I don't want to be in Arizona anymore. So...
let me ask you this, and maybe this would be an oversimplification, but forgive me if I do so. Would this early on period be more of a romantic love in the time, April 18, 2008? Would that be more of a platonic love, for lack of a better way of saying it?
It's complicated because by that time I felt more in an unconditional love where in terms that I just wanted him to be happy. I wanted him to have a future that was happy. I wanted to have my own future, but I wanted us to be able to remain on good terms. And at the same time, we kept confusing our boundaries because we were still sleeping together and doing that. So that kind of kept my heart more involved than maybe it should have been.
Okay. So on April 18th, 2008, then, what you're telling us is you had an unconditional love for him.
That's how I would characterize it.
Okay. Exhibit 485, if I'm correct, was the note you made at his memorial, correct?
Yes.
Just, you can't see it all here. Let me bring it up for you. That was your note to him, correct?
Correct.
And you had, through email or what have you at least, provided that photo of him to someone who was organizing that service. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Before we get into the content of this, would it be safe to assume you weren't the only person at this memorial service?
Yes.
Matter of fact, you told us you talked to several people at that memorial service, correct?
Yes, I knew a lot of people there.
You weren't the only person, to your understanding, that thought Travis was a great guy, were you?
No, I was not.
As to what you wrote, and do you remember when his memorial service was?
I believe it was on a Sunday or maybe a Monday. So it would have been the 15th or 16th of June.
Okay. So on the 15th or 16th of June, you write that, Travis, you're beautiful on the inside and out. Did you mean that?
Yes.
And you also say you always told me that. Did Travis tell you that you were beautiful on the inside and out as well? Is that what you're saying there?
Yeah, he said I was more beautiful on the inside.
And that made you feel good about yourself?
Yes.
You tell him that you never stopped believing in him. And I know that you always believed in me. When you say you've never stopped believing in Travis, what were you referring to?
His potential and his ability to realize what he wanted to do with his life. And I also believed that he could get better and fix the parts of him that he considered broken or that needed work. Like, we all have those parts, and he was constantly striving to work on himself.
You say, thank you for sharing so much. Is it fair to me to assume that you're talking about more than storage space for your pictures?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
I just mean the things that he imparted to me. He shared a lot spiritually with me, and his wisdom, his insights, his philosophies, his creeds, all of these things that I sort of adopted a lot of them. And we went on so many trips. It felt like we had lived an entire lifetime in 1 year. And so I was basically referring to the whole canon of experiences that we'd had.
And his sharing of his, I think you said philosophical and spiritual self and beliefs and feelings, that meant a lot to you?
Yes, very much.
You also say that the world has been blessed because you, referring to Travis, have been here. When you wrote that on June 15th or June 16th of 2008, did you believe that?
I did.
You finish this note to him by saying, I love you. On June 15th or 16th of 2008, did you still feel that same unconditional love, to use your words, for Travis that you were feeling in April of 2008?
Well, I still had love for him, yes, and I was thinking now more in terms of eternity.
Well, that makes sense given the time frame where we're at. But let's maybe take a step back from eternity for a second. Looking at that quote, I love you. Would that be a true statement on June 2nd, 2008?
Yes,
June 3rd,
yes,
2008? June 4th, 2008?
yes.
How about the days in between? June 4th, 2008 and his memorial service. Would that be true?
Yes,
How about today?
yes,
Would that be true?
yes, it's still true.
You also talked about you said something. You recall hearing the recorded phone call you had with Mr. Alexander on May 10th, 2008. Recall hearing that
Yes,
during
I
this
do.
trial? Okay. And something was said on there, because, you know, apart from the spiritual side of your relationship and the friendship, and close friendship you shared, there was a sexual aspect to your relationship as well, right?
Yes,
And part of that, anyway, we've seen in the phone call of May 10th, right?
yes,
You made a comment in that tape about him making you feel like a goddess. I believe those were your words. Do you remember that?
yes.
Okay. Refresh our memory, first of all, what he was doing to make you feel like a goddess, or what that was a reference to.
It was a reference to the time that we took a bath together when he had all the candles everywhere and rose petals and there was music. And it wasn't just, it didn't go quickly. It was drawn out, it was romantic.
And that made you feel great, right?
Yes,
Were there other times in your relationship, your sexual relationship, where it could be said you felt like a goddess?
were there other times?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Describe those for us.
Well, it was more just how, rather than the act, it almost could have been almost any act, but it was how he made me feel and how his demeanor was and how he treated me during those things that made me feel special. And like, it wasn't just for physical gratification, it was because our minds and our hearts were sort of in alignment as well.
Is that a feeling that you experienced before in your life, before Mr. Alexander?
I would say yes, I've experienced it before.
To this degree?
Well, as far as the way he put me on a pedestal, no, not to that degree.
And you say he put you on a pedestal. We talked about it. We talked a little bit this morning about, you know, the bath, the things he did for you. Were there other things you felt like we haven't talked about where he put you on this pedestal?
It was more like the way he would look at me sometimes, compliments he would give me, and sometimes just out of the blue he would recall something that I did, or a thought he had that day, and usually it was in terms of elevating me above all else kind of thing. And I mean, I didn't really believe it, but I believed that he might believe it. So it made me feel special because he viewed me that way, that I was somebody special.
So in terms of your relationship with Mr. Alexander then, there were times when you were way up here on this pedestal, right?
Yes.
And there were other times you were down on the ground being kicked, right?
Yes.
Objection, meeting.
Abstained.
You were right way up here on this pedestal, right?
Yes.
You were also down on the ground, is that correct?
Yes.
Being kicked?
Objection, meeting.
Were you kicked while you were on the ground?
Once I was, yes. On one occasion, I mean, he kicked me twice.
Objection, no question before the witness.
Abstained.
Okay. So we have a relationship with lots of highs and lots of lows, right?
Yes.
Now, you testified previously that you met Travis in September 2006. You talked about your relationship. You were in a relationship with Mr. Brewer. You talked to us eventually about the time that you became a couple with Mr. Alexander, and times when you weren't a couple with Mr. Alexander. Do you recall doing that?
Yes.
Okay. What I want to talk about now is, because it may not be clear, and you were asked about, do you recall being asked about after breaking up why you felt like you had permission to be over at his home, that sort of thing? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And in that regard, what was the difference? First starting, say, for example, with the interaction between you and Mr. Alexander, of when you were a couple, by the definitions that you and he had used, as opposed to when you weren't a couple by that same definition. Was there a difference in terms of how you interacted with each other?
As far as, well, in my mind, I drew a distinction. We still continued to be intimate and hang out and go on dates and travel and talk late at night and email and chat and text back and forth. All those things continued, but I drew a distinction in my mind that he's no longer my boyfriend. I'm no longer his girlfriend. We're just maybe going to get back together or maybe not. It was kind of like that. We were in a state of limbo for a while.
Well, let's break that down a little bit if we could. You were having a sexual relationship with Mr. Alexander before you became a couple, correct?
Yes,
And that sexual relationship, that included oral sex?
yes,
Did it include anal sex before you were a couple?
just the one time the night I was baptized, and that ended pretty quickly.
Okay. And did it include, vaginal sex?
No,
Okay. So when you became a couple then, did the sexual relationship, did that somehow automatically change the sexual boundaries between the two of you?
no, it didn't really change. We tried to keep the same standards, I guess you could say.
The standards being the law of chastity as told to you by Mr. Alexander, is that right?
Okay.
Are we talking about the laws of chastity as told to you by Mr. Alexander?
Yes,
And that standard, to your understanding, what did that prohibit? What act did that prohibit?
it prohibited premarital vaginal sex.
Okay. And you had told us about the incident where you were sleeping and you woke up with Mr. Alexander's penis inside your vagina. Do you remember telling us about that?
Yes,
Was he your boyfriend at that time?
yes,
So you didn't have vaginal intercourse until you were boyfriend and girlfriend, correct? That would have been the first time, so.
yeah, but it wasn't regular. It was, I guess I kind of looked at it as an accident or a mistake, and we didn't do that again until after we broke up.
You say that you saw this first encounter where he was inside your vagina with his penis as an accident or mistake. Is that right? Is that what
Yes.
you were describing? Okay. How is it that you can rationalize or characterize this invasion in that way?
Objection, characterization, invasion, character, and rationalize.
Restate your question.
He places his penis in your vagina when you're asleep, right?
Yes,
And you just told us you wrote that off to a mistake.
that's how I looked at it.
Now, I could drop a pen and it'd be a mistake, but it'd be hard to do what he did as a mistake. So how do you get there in your mind?
Well, we were sleeping and no words were exchanged. All of his motor skills were functioning, but I don't know that if he was really like mentally conscious or not. He was there, he was breathing hard, that kind of thing, but he didn't say anything, and it was never mentioned the next day, so I assumed maybe he wasn't fully aware of what he was doing, because maybe he was groggy or disoriented or still half asleep. I don't know.
Okay. Getting back to the idea of you and Mr. Alexander as a couple and not a couple, you broke up on what date?
June 29th, 2007.
Okay. June, as we've heard though, June 29th, 2007 was not the end of your sexual relationship with him, right?
That's right.
So in that regard, one has to ponder, what does that what did the end of that relationship mean in terms of your relationship with Travis?
It meant to me that we were now two sovereign single adults.
A lot of people, when they break up, and can you understand that a lot of people, when they break up, that's the end of things. They stop sleeping together, they stop contacting each other, right?
Rejection, leaving violence to other people.
Sustained.
After you broke up, you said, your words sounded more like intergovernmental relations. You said you were both two sovereign states, right?
Rejection,
Is that what I heard?
Yes, we were single and free to make our own decisions.
Okay. Single and free to make your own decisions. Yet you then, by your testimony, were still making the decision to engage in sexual relations with Mr. Alexander, correct?
rejection as an answer, maybe.
Overruled, do the answer.
Yes, I was still making that decision.
And you were asked about, well, based on your assessment of this breakup, then, was he, to use your words, as a sovereign state, free to engage in sexual activity with whomever he chose, in your mind?
In my mind, except for the moral implications, I believe that he was free to do that, and it would be something that I shouldn't take offense to because he's not my boyfriend any longer.
Well, what about other concerns? What about health concerns? Did you feel like he was obligated to let you know if he engaged in sexual behavior with anyone else because of fear of sexually transmitted diseases?
That was one concern I had, yes.
Did you and he discuss that situation? We're broken up, but we're still going to have sex, but I'm going to let you know if I start with someone else?
There was a conversation somewhat like that, so I assumed he would just tell me if he decided to date somebody else. That's why I asked him when I saw him with that girl, but it wasn't, as far as STDs and that kind of thing, we didn't have a sit-down discussion about it.
Okay. And you mentioned the girl. You're talking about when you went to Mr. Alexander's home, you saw him with this girl through the window,
Yes.
right? And you were asked, why was it okay for you to be there after you had broken up? Do you recall being asked that?
Yes.
Why was it okay for you to be there?
Well, the night that I went there, it was okay because he gave me the green light. I called him before going. He said, sure. It was a very brief.
Rejection, hearsay.
That night, he encouraged you to come over. Is that what you're telling us?
He didn't encourage me. He just gave me permission. I needed to get my social security card.
Okay. This issue of this discussion you had with Travis about this girl, were you angry during this discussion?
No. I was actually frightened a little bit.
What do you mean
I guess frightened isn't the word, but intimidated. I didn't want to be confrontational. I wanted to just throw it out there and let him know it's okay. If you're dating someone, you can let me know. I'm going to be cool about that, but I want to know rather than sticking around and, while he kept giving me intermittent doses of incentive to stay and believe in him, we can just be friends and draw a line right now, and you can have your life and I'll have mine, and it's okay. I just wanted to know, that's all.
You made a comment before we get too far off that and on confrontation. You said you didn't want to be confrontational just a second ago. You also made the comment during your time with last week that you weren't allowed to be confrontational with Travis. What do you mean by that?
There are a few times when I asserted myself and he checked it very quickly.
Okay. Checked it how?
Usually by verbally snapping back was how it usually went.
When he snapped back verbally, did this cause fear in you?
At first I felt more like a chastised child. Eventually it began to instill fear and intimidation.
Okay. Judge.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take the noon recess. Please be back in the designated area at 1:25. Please remember the admonition. You are excused. Have a nice lunch. Please be seated. You may step down. We're excused. We are at recess.